Good morning, Priscilla. Thank you so much for joining me here today on the podcast Conversations and Connections. I'm very excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. Sincerely,
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
Yes. Well, it's wonderful to have you here to reach a new audience in a different country because you are in the neighboring US. So, for all of the Canadian listeners, it's wonderful to be able to introduce somebody else. And I had the pleasure of first meeting you at the Loved Already conference, which was the first one that Tori Hope Peterson has put on. And she invited you to speak and to share your story. So, that's the first time I heard about you, and I had a chance to meet you briefly. And I
Hmm.
knew right away, I'm like, I need to get this woman on here to share her incredible story and her heart for God and her deep faith. So it's a real pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, no, shout out to God first. He gets the glory for just everything in my life and where I'm at. And God uses people. So shout out to Tori too. She
Mhm.
truly, a connector and, really is big on community and building strong friendships and relationships.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
think that's really cool that, I think when you listen to the Holy Spirit, everything comes together. And I think the
Mhm.
team that she brought in, like just everyone from like not just the speakers, but to the
Mhm.
worship leaders, to the volunteers to put it on, where just everyone was meant to be there. And it was just such a
Mhm.
powerful time.
It really was. I mean, I had, to be honest, never heard of Defiance, Ohio before, or
I don't
Iowa,
think you're
and
alone.
Ohio. Yeah, it's a very small little town.
Yes.
But I knew right away that we needed to go. And a large part of it was based on the fact that my sister, she has gone through various fostering and adoption scenarios with her own family. And it was just such a privilege to be able to be there and for my family to meet her and the girls. And we had a cousin weekend. Like it was just a really beautiful
Mhm.
connecting moment. And actually, my daughter was baptized that weekend. So it was very exciting.
Yes, that's so awesome. Yes.
Yeah, it really was.
I feel like those are moments that you just like will never forget. And like you
Yeah.
can't put a price on that. It's just something
Mhm.
you're able to totally instill in your heart and in your
Oh,
memory. So
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, she'll never forget that. We're actually going to have a little surprise thing for her coming up shortly, just to kind of honor the moment. And we're
Oh,
excited about that. Yeah. So before
yay.
we go any further, I just want to be able to introduce everybody to you and share a little bit about who you are.
All right.
So Priscilla, yes, you are a local and national sexual abuse advocate. You are sought out as a motivational speaker by numerous community organizations such as the local law enforcement, National Guard, prisons across the US, public and private schools, sharing your story of overcoming incest and bring awareness through education in order to end abuse. Hallelujah.
Yes.
She's been invited to speak before the Senate and the House of Representatives. She is a part of the Clean Slate Bill, which is her first bill that was signed by a governor, Governor Whitmer. And you've been featured on various programs, a lot of different magazines, and you were the 2019 Woman of the Year, 2020 10 over 10 award winner, 2022 Governor Awards recipient, and recently received the 2023 Neighborhood Impact Award. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that specific award too. And just a few other things, because I could probably go on for a long time here.
Oh,
But
really?
you have been invited to speak at various universities, such as Columbia, working for crime survivors for Safety and Justice, in a national position where she serves as the Michigan statewide manager for this organization. And you are currently working on creating a trauma recovery centers across Michigan, and the Michigan Safer Act, which focuses on victim compensation, rehab for those who commit crimes, as well as the rehab for those who have committed crimes. In a nutshell, the organization changes and creates laws on behalf of crime victims and survivors in order to make a safer Michigan. And everything that you say yes to has to do with healing and safety for people. And I absolutely love that. It's such an incredible organization that you have going here in so many different ways. And I can see your heart all over it and your
Mm.
faith journey. But I wanted to start off by just asking you, because we have something in common. We both graduated with elementary education.
Yeah.
And my heart too was the primary kids, kindergarten to grade six. So maybe talk a little bit about your educational journey and where you are today as a result of that.
Yeah, so thank you. Every time I listen to that stuff, I'm always like, wait, is that really me?
It's
that's how
true.
good, yeah, like yeah, that's how good God is. Because you're just
Yeah.
like, wait, like God, you've done all of that. You've allowed me to experience these things and accomplish these things. And it's just really cool considering, growing up in a very dysfunctional family and large families. My mom has 18 brothers, or my mom has 8 brothers and sisters. My dad has 14 brothers and sisters. So
Incredible.
that's a lot of uncles and aunts and a lot of
Yes.
cousins. Like it's really
Yeah.
hard to keep track.
Yeah.
But just growing up in, like I said, just a very traumatizing home and experience, from, the FBI had raided all of our houses on my dad's side at the same time. All of my uncles and my grandfather went to prison for, at the time, was one of the biggest drug scandals in Lansing, Michigan. And my dad was the only one that didn't go to prison. And it was really tough when you have the last name that you have and you are being, put in the news and magazines and news articles, and there's a lot to be said. And it's unfortunate when you're a child and you can't really fully understand it at the time, but you also can't really fully
No.
speak for yourself. So from that, I just knew that I wanted something very different for my life. Obviously, we'll go into a little bit more later about just then being abused at the age of 12 by my father. I knew that the answer for me at the time, I always like, because I struggled with my relationship with God and trusting him.
Mhm.
The thought process for me was like, it has to be education. Like, education is going
Yeah.
to be my way out. Like, I know I've always known since I was a little girl that I was always called to ministry. But during like my rebellious, like lack of faith, like not trusting God, like,
Mhm.
and also just the realness of my situation,
Right.
I just kind of separated the two. Was like, I want
Mhm.
secular, I want education. I was always very moved and touched by my teachers. I've had incredible teachers who I am still friends with today.
Really? That's wonderful.
Yes. Yeah, like so teachers were like huge to me. They were mentors. They were
Yeah.
that I kind of felt like, my home life was really tough, but so I just really
Mhm.
strived to do excellent when it came to like my schooling, played 3 sports all year round. So like was super involved in my school, anything to not be
Mhm.
home. And
Right.
so I just knew education was a big thing for me. I love kids, but I have to say that the education like idea at the time wasn't so much to be necessarily a teacher. I wanted
Mhm.
to be a superintendent of a school district. And
You
I
were
was very,
aiming high.
yes, I was aiming high. I was like, how do I
Yeah.
jump from this to this? And that's kind of like my
I love
personality. And
that.
like, I'll do what it takes to get there, but like,
Right.
just tell me what I have to do to get from here to like
Yeah.
here.
I can
And
see that just in meeting you briefly and reading your bio. I can see that. That's totally you.
yes, it's like it is. And so like I think at the time was just like I was picked to 2 years in a row where I was able to go and do like a little mini internship as a high schooler with influential people in our community. And one of
Mhm.
the people was our superintendent of the district, and the second person was the chief of police. And
Wow.
so we got to like follow them around and kind of see what their work is like and
Right.
their their level of integrity and wanting to make a difference in the community. And
Mhm.
it was just students who were doing well, and they wanted to
Mhm.
honor them and kind of give them this opportunity to just see beyond and above like even just the high school level, like what else can you do?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so I was just super excited, and I think just kind of seeing the things that our superintendent at the time did,
Mhm.
I was like, I want to do that. But in order to do that, you had to teach for a few years. So I was like, let me just, and I
Right.
love kids, so it really worked out.
Yeah.
Actually was a nanny for like a little over 10 years, and I loved
Oh,
it.
wow. That's great experience.
Yeah, instead of
Yeah.
kind of just going into the classroom, I decided to do it more at the at-home level for like
Mhm.
younger kids and parents that really just were like, you know, maybe their jobs were at a different level. Like these are
Right.
CEOs who really just need the extra help. And so I took on jobs like that and I absolutely loved it.
That's so meaningful, though, that being around kids at that tender age is so impactful. So that's a great opportunity for you.
Yeah, so that's kind of what kind of got me that direction. I will say I went to a private Christian school, so even though I did get
Mm.
a secular degree or a
Mm.
marketplace degree, I went to a private Christian school, so like it was definitely I still was able to get that faith-based
Right.
influence, and I got to lead worship all 4 years and all of those great things. So
That's
yeah.
amazing. Did I read
Mhm.
correctly that you were the first person to finish your degree in your
Yeah, I'm the
family?
first person
Yep.
to graduate with a degree in my family, and it really was a game changer, but also just like, you know, so I was just thinking about this and writing a little bit in my notes this morning about, I'm working on a book for next year, and
Oh, good.
a lot of like the generational like curses and the generational
Mm,
cycles that I think that
mhm.
we find ourselves in. Um,
Right.
I think sometimes, not to say that it's not easy because it's not, but I think sometimes we make it seem like it's so hard that it's unachievable to break a cycle
Mm,
or break a
mm,
pattern where for me it just came down to making a different decision than what I was seeing. And
right.
so for me, that was like huge, starting
Yeah.
with schooling. There's so much facts that have to do with when you have a lack of education. I
Mm,
think I was just at a conference and they said like 73, 74% of those who are incarcerated did not receive an education, did not finish their
wow.
high school.
That's
And
a
so it has a
really high
lot
percentage.
high. So I knew at the time, it just goes into like just me making that decision of like, I knew this was going to be important for me to finish and to also get out of the situation that I was in. So much so that it was like completely out of the state. Like I was like, let
Mm,
me go as far as
mm.
I can go from Michigan. And I ended up in Texas, one of my favorite
Wow.
states. And
That's
yeah,
amazing.
it's cool.
That is amazing. I mean, just knowing that you had the faith to take that step, and that was a huge risk, knowing that you were going out on your own.
Mhm.
But yet, God placed this desire inside of you, and He obviously had favor upon you, and the mercy was just overflowing to provide you opportunities so that you could finish your education and then keep doing all these incredible things that you're doing. You talk about the fact that you are local and national sexual abuse advocates. Perhaps you can share a little bit of how you got to that particular advocacy, and maybe what has been the response to others based on your decision to not be silent. Yeah, that's a good way to put
Yeah.
it.
So, gosh, maybe like 12 years ago, I shared my story on Easter Sunday, and it's my favorite holiday, and it was one of those moments where the night before I just like could not sleep. So I was just writing in my notes, and at the time I was supposed to be working on a book, so this piece came out of a place of just writing, and like I really felt like God was like helping me write my notes. And so I kind of did this like post of like the power of the cross, the power of forgiveness, like, and I kind of worded it where it was like at age 14, I was, you know, sexually abused by my father. I was raped by my father, and, questioning whether or not like I was miscarrying. I think I put at age 15, I stood before a judge and I lied to protect my family. And that at
Wow.
age 16, I ended up, kind of down this road that almost like I never thought I would find myself in. Um,
Mhm.
and so I kind of just went down through the ages and I posted, but like I talked about how like Jesus never left me or looked at me like I was too messy. He actually kind of just stepped right in, and the healing that took place in my life, I could not be more thankful for. And
Mhm.
the power of forgiveness, the power of the cross, and kind of just tied it into this piece. And I posted it the next morning, not thinking anything, just really thinking at the time I was posting little pieces of what I thought at the time I would
Right.
include that were from my book. And
Yeah.
so I shared that. And the next thing I know, I woke up the next morning and like hundreds and thousands of people like were messaging me. And I was like, oh my goodness, like what is happening? Like, because I
It's
had posted on
overwhelming.
Facebook, on Instagram, and then the next thing I know, like my emails were flooded, like my Facebook was flooded, my Instagram, my Twitter, like I barely use Twitter. Like I was just like, what in the world is happening?
Wow.
And
You
so
opened up something.
yeah, and not intentionally. Like
Right.
I was a little nervous to be honest by just the numbers, and I was nervous by and overwhelmed by the fact that like I had no idea how many people could relate to my situation, specifically it being family who had
Right.
abused them. And
Hmm.
so, um, honestly, I I say it kind of created a platform that I didn't expect, but I felt like I had to like read the messages and I had to
Right.
respond and I wanted to
Hmm.
be able to like hear them
Hmm.
and surprisingly there were many people who weren't on the side of healing, that they were still hanging on to things that had happened to them 15, 20 years ago. And so I just knew, I said, God, like, I don't know what this is supposed to mean for me. I know this is my story. I got
Hmm.
nervous because I felt like, what if people didn't understand? Like,
Of course.
society says I should hate my father and I should be
Mhm.
bitter and angry. And I looked up the statistics of what my life should be, and everything was just so negative that I was just like,
Wow.
this is not the life I want.
Right. It's like
And
you
so
almost made a decision right there, going, that's not what I want to live.
this is not me. And so I was super thankful that the Holy Spirit spoke so clear to me that this was what I
Mm.
was supposed to do. And so I just ended up little by little, I was responding to messages. It took forever. But when I finally finished that last message, I knew that I knew like this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. And
That's
so it
incredible.
kind of opened this opportunity for me to like just be a listener. I wasn't getting paid.
Mm.
I wasn't getting paid to do anything. This was just something that like
Right.
people would be like, hey, Priscilla, like I'm getting ready to start my court case. Like, can you come with me because I'm super nervous, I'm super scared. And I'm
Wow.
like, yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. And it
Wow.
grew so much that like even the court advocates, the lawyers, the prosecutors, judges were like, Priscilla, like, hey, there's a case coming up. Like, I think you should, if you can, like be a support system to them, not even
Wow.
knowing that there was such a thing as community advocates.
Mm.
Now being in this work for a really long time, I've learned that there are many survived victims and survivors that prefer
Mm.
community advocates over court advocates because
Wow.
they don't trust the justice system, and
Right.
there's been so much harm there that they
Right.
would rather have a community figure versus like the way that the justice system is can be super tough.
Right.
We're learning how to navigate it and make it
Mm.
better every single day here in the state of
Mm.
Michigan. But you know, the justice system can be really, really tough, and there's no easy or
Mm.
long, you know, there are long processes
Right.
to healing on the other end. So
Of
yeah,
course.
it just kind of opened up for me, and I kept
Mm.
saying yes and saying yes. And the next thing I knew, I was on a case with over 300 victims and survivors on one case.
Wow.
My first national case, which was the Larry Nassar case.
Right.
Um,
I read that. I read her book.
yeah,
Yeah, Rachel.
but
Hmm.
it was just a support. It was just for me to be a support system. And I still talk
Wow.
to many of the victims and survivors from that case
Hmm.
today.
Hmm.
And it's just really cool. Like I said, it was just a lot of little yeses that led
Hmm.
me to like where I'm at today. And they were God yeses. They weren't things
Hmm.
that like I was necessarily like striving for. I didn't even know what was possible. So like I just was like little yeses kind of led me
Okay.
to where I'm at now.
That's incredible. Honestly, I think back even in my life, if I hadn't said one little tiny yes, how different the direction of my life would have been. And it's
Mhm.
that constant, and I know that you would agree with this, is that constant daily interaction with God, that personal relationship where you're hearing from him through his word and your connection with other people so that you are prepared to hear what he is putting on your heart. And I
Yeah.
think that you were just such a beautiful testimony of how God has moved in you. And now, because of that, your reach is just gone beyond what you ever could have imagined because it was God's plan. It wasn't even your plan, it was God's plan. So I'm sure through all of this, you had an incredible outpouring of support, especially through different victims that were finally listening to somebody share their story that they could trust. And that's
Yeah.
probably why so many women were, they just wanted you to be their advocate because they could trust you. And I think that's such a beautiful gift that you have shared with so many people. But what about maybe your immediate family? How did they respond to this not necessarily the platform because that's not what you're trying to do, but just what you shared that was unexpected. What was their response to your choice to do this?
Yeah, so I think it depends on which family member. So again, a lot of family members
You have a lot of
involved.
family members. Yes.
Many of them are very supportive. And it's really one of those things where, you know, a lot of the times in life, the negative voices seem to be louder than the positive ones. You could look at
Hmm.
numbers and there could be like 500 people supporting you and like
Hmm.
showing up for you.
Hmm.
And then you'll have like two or three people who have something negative to say. And for
Hmm.
some reason, that's just how the enemy works. You end up listening to the three people versus the 500.
Absolutely.
I can
Absolutely.
honestly say that
Hmm.
happened to me for a very short time. I had a lot of support, but there were a few that, thought I was doing this for attention because I woke
Hmm.
up to way more people like commenting, sharing, and liking the post that I think people are really moved by numbers, especially society now. It's just crazy. It's
Yes,
like
they are.
it started then like 10 years ago, and even now it's just like how many followers, how many likes, how many all of those things. I don't I don't know why everyone's so moved by numbers, but it is what it is. But at
But
the
they
time,
are.
it was just like one of those things where it's like you're doing this for education or for attention, or you're doing this or like one of the things I mentioned at the conference was that someone had mentioned to me that like I can't believe you're airing like our dirty
Right.
laundry, like in your dirty laundry out there.
Right.
um and so for a minute there it was crushing, like
Of
some of the people
course.
that I thought were super supportive towards me
Right.
um sharing my story. That just wasn't the case. But
Right.
I can say that as I stayed obedient to what God wanted me to do, you know, I just knew that this is what I was supposed to do. Like, this is what I was supposed to do with what was dealt to me.
Right.
So I ended up just kind of like having to shield myself a little bit.
Hmm.
Um,
Makes sense.
had to make some different choices as far as boundaries and things like that. But I kept
Mhm.
doing the little yeses. And I can confidently say that at this point in my life, my whole family is very supportive of not only what I do, but now, you know, healing is contagious.
Mm,
So
I
like,
love that.
I, as a result of like me choosing this for my life, I feel like, you know, it has been a domino effect for some of us. Not all of us, because there are some people in my family who are not healed, have not chosen to do the hard work to recover and overcome and see themselves in a different light.
Right.
Um, most of us have, and I think that it's just seeing that someone else has done something different,
Yeah.
and you want that. And so,
Hmm.
that's what I saw that in others. I knew what I wanted for my life. And the next thing I know, there were others in my family who were just like, I need something different. And I feel like everyone is doing what they feel is best. And the thing is this sin, you know, and specifically our family, incest, everyone has their own experience,
Yeah.
and what they went through, right? They have
Right.
their own right to say, this is how I saw it, this is how
For
I
sure.
felt. And so I think that everyone has to be okay with like sharing whatever that experience is.
Yeah. Kind of on their terms and what works personally for them. Right.
Yeah, and I wish that I could have done like shared my story in a way where it wouldn't have affected my family, but there was
Hmm.
no way around that. And the thing was, the biggest piece about me what I shared was about what Jesus did, who he
Hmm.
was, what he
Right.
did on the cross, what he made available. And it was
Hmm.
crazy to me that people couldn't see the big picture, that it was a testimony. And I think that I say this in my book, when you heal, you hear differently, you see differently, you act differently.
See
Um,
that for sure.
and so I think that because there were a lot of us that were unhealed for a very long time. And so because of that, we had to filter things through wherever level of healing you were at.
Right.
And
Yeah. Well,
so
that's a
that's
good
kind of
way
what
of looking
happened.
at it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
that term contagious because it's just that power of that choice that you made based on faith, but that you were doing it because you were trying to lift up the name of Jesus and
Yeah.
show that it really was Christ that walked you through this. It wasn't you walking you, it was Christ walking you, Christ leading you. And then people start to see that in you. And I can see that for sure. This would not happen overnight. And people
Mm-mm.
had to really get accustomed to, okay, what does this mean for me personally? Because it causes people to look in and to feel their pain. And people
Yeah.
don't want to do that. It takes a long time for them to acknowledge the pain, and then what are you going to do with it? And how can you be an overcomer? And you really are an example of literally of being an overcomer. And you are such a strong, strong woman of faith. And I loved hearing you speak at Loved Already because it was so eye-opening and so inspiring. And it really got me, especially when you talked about not only working with the survivors, but on the opposite, the people that caused the pain. And just on Sunday, our pastor was talking about preaching through Matthew 5, where, and he says, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And we're living in such an intense society. And today, as you know, it's very hard to be walking with Christ without getting a lot of flack. And it means we love our enemies. And we do something countercultural. So when you were speaking at Loved Already, you talked about how you wanted to hear the other side and you wanted to get to know, why did that person get to this specific place in their life to be able to cause that pain? And I just wanted you to speak on that today because it is so countercultural what you were doing.
Yeah, I think it's important too to kind of start like with like just having like a full picture of like how I got there. Like my story is that, I was raped by my father, who was also a pastor at the time. There was no separation between like my home life and my church life, like even physically. Like my home was literally connected to my church. And so the trauma that I had experienced, I had so much healing that had to take place. And it really came down to me hearing a sermon on the power of forgiveness. And I just was like, that's what I want. What do I have to do to achieve that? And so I think that it's important to know that counseling and Christ go hand in hand. I think both should be like applied to everyone's lives. We all need counseling and we all need Christ. And so I think because of that, I was able to first do the inner work that I needed, the inner healing that I needed. I was able to do that because of the power of the Holy Spirit and because of what Jesus did. And so what I did as an adult was I really tried to get to a place where I just kind of wanted to understand, like, how did we get there? Like, how could my father, who was a pastor, a very charismatic man, very like hardworking, like, how could he get to this place and do this to his children? And even though like, there was nothing that will ever excuse what my father did, I was able to get that understanding by finding out that my grandfather raped 13 of his 14 kids. And so just understanding like the cycles that were repeated in his family, it just made sense, right? Like again, not to excuse anything. It was just like, okay, like, now I understand like how we got here. And so, it made me start wondering like, well, what if my dad would have gotten the healing he really needed and deserved? Would that have been a different outcome for me? And so I really just started to talk to God about all of what I was feeling, because I was really conflicted, because all across the Bible you hear things that are very like tough and don't really make sense. Like you said, like, forgive your enemies, pray for them. You want us to bless them. And then it talks about the level of how many times you have to forgive. You're like 70 times 7. Like that's a lot of forgiving. Like that seems like that's really hard, right? And then if someone does something to you, like scriptures talk about how if someone steals from you, like give them the shirt off your back. Just the things that says honor your mother and father. It doesn't say honor your mother and father if they do this, if they do that, if they do that. So there's these commandments that are like, well, what about this and what about that? And it just made me wonder if like this whole thing we call like life is like one big test of like how we're going to love people despite what's been done within reason, right? I don't mean don't set up boundaries and like I feel like people always think forgiveness means reconciliation and you're completely separate. I do believe as a believer forgiveness is mandatory, so that one, we're forgiven, but two, it frees us up, has more to do with what goes on the inside of us, but reconciliation is optional, and you can choose to reconcile or not reconcile, and it's okay. I believe that God made a way for every person to make it, and I believe that some people will make it behind bars. But I just know that those people behind bars are also children of God. God sees them differently than we see them. And so I just wanted to have God's heart on all of that. And Doesn't
Well,
mean I
that's
don't get
true.
angry. I hear a lot of cases. I'm on a lot of cases. Doesn't mean that I don't get angry or that I don't cry when I hear, very, very awful things.
Of
But it
course.
also makes me wonder, like, how do they get there? And that's the beauty of the organization I work for. Crime
Mhm.
Survivors for Safety and Justice is one of my favorite jobs I've ever done, outside of ministry, because it's very practical. And the work that we do is we bring so much healing. We change
Mhm.
either legislation or create new legislations on behalf of victims who've been affected by crime.
Amazing.
There's two divisions. I try not to say sides because we don't really work against each other. There is survivor side. We want to make sure that they have everything that they need in order to heal. We want to make sure we break barriers that they face.
Yes.
And then on the division called Time Done, these are all people who've done time. And when you really start to do a lot of research, you start to really understand that a lot of people who commit crimes have been a victim themselves. I 12 years ago, I shared a little thing about hurt people. And the next thing you know, you hear a lot of people saying it. So I was like, but I don't really want to focus on all the hurt people.
Right.
I want to help people get healed. And so I started saying, well, even though, yes, hurt people, but healed people heal people. So my entire life is dedicated to helping people
Love that.
get healed and go from this victim mindset to becoming victorious. Because even even as a victim, if you keep yourself as a victim, you keep yourself from reaching your full potential. And there is still a
Yeah.
purpose and destiny that
Yeah.
God has for every victim and survivor. And I want to make sure that they achieve that.
Oh man, I just love so much what you're doing. It is so beautiful. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to talk a little bit about mentoring because I'm sure, as you know, you can't get through life without having that group of people that surround you, your community, your church, other women in your life speaking into your life. And you started something called Remarkable. It's a nonprofit, and I would love for you to share a little bit about it. First of all, I love the name so much, Remarkable. Because I think mentoring and the whole term are just a perfect marriage of being, because it is remarkable to have other women and other men or whatever speaking into your life and encouraging you and praying for you. So talk a little bit about that.
Yes, I love Remarkable. So Remarkable is a nonprofit that it actually started off as a young adult or a young women's ministry in our
Mhm.
church.
Okay.
And I saw the fruit of it, and we ended up becoming a nonprofit a few years ago.
Mhm.
And we've also expanded to not just being a women's group, but becoming just a young adult group. And now men are a part of it because
Great.
let's face it, men need mentorship and discipleship too. And
Yes,
so, uh,
absolutely.
yeah, so we kind of broke down. It's crazy how Remarkable started. Remarkable started, oh gosh, 7 years ago now. And it was during a season in my life where it had nothing to do with like my family story, but just I went through a really, really tough time. Being a public figure can be super tough.
Yeah.
There are people who love you and support you, and then there's others who don't understand the work. And so
Right.
sometimes you'll end up with people who just start things that aren't true. And
Right.
I just went through a really, really hurtful situation and a season where it almost like took me out, honestly.
Yeah.
And I remember I was sitting in the front row, and this prophet was at our church, and she was speaking, and she's come every year. And all of a sudden, she's speaking, and then she shifts the conversation, and she comes up to me, stands in front of me, and she's like, "And the Lord, like, has something to say to you. The Lord calls you remarkable." And she just started speaking things into my life. Like, I'm starting to cry. I'm like, what is happening? And she was saying things that she knew nothing about. And it just brought so much healing. But she was like basically like prophesying over my life. And
Mhm.
um after that day, like I ended up going out to eat with a few of the young girls, and my pastor was like, I really think you should start something for the young women. We have a lot of young women, they're really drawn to you. I think you should start something. But I was in no position or place like to give. Like, I was going through one of the darkest seasons of my life outside of being raped by my father, that
Right.
I was just like, I can't do this. So basically I ended up saying yes, and my those little yeses again ended up being where
Amazing how those things work.
yes, we created the Remarkable, and we break it down. The RE stands for we all get a redo. Mark is that we're all marked with a purpose. Able is that we're all able to reach that mark. We just can't
I
do it
love it.
alone.
I
And
love
I
it so
just knew
much.
that it was the mentors in my life that helped me get to where I'm at. And so why not give back to the community by
Mm,
being that mentor and a stability? We meet every
mm,
Tuesday. I
love it
hardly
so
ever
much.
cancel because stability and consistency is really, really big for this age group, 18 to 35, when you're trying to discover who you are, what your identity is, and what's the purpose for your life. So yeah.
Yeah. I love what you're doing, and it's amazing because God placed on my heart something similar a little while ago. So I'm starting something in January called Daughters of the King, and it's the same kind of thing for young women to have a platform to be able to speak about their faith journey and their story, and to build a community of younger women that are like 18 to like 25, 30. Similar type of thing, because I believe in it so much, and I just love so much what you're doing. Maybe just before we finish, is there a word of encouragement you could share with somebody today that might be in a really tough situation?
Yeah, I think that no matter what situation you're in, everyone experiences something negative in this thing we
Mm,
call life. And the thing
yeah.
is that there is hope. Okay. Hope used to be like a feeling for me, but it's
Mhm.
more than a feeling. Hope is a person. His name is Jesus, and there is hope for your situation to be completely turned around. One thing I always say is that, if you want the beauty for ashes story like me, all you have to do is give Jesus your ashes.
Mm,
And it's the best decision you can make because he's the only one that could turn something so awful and
yeah.
use it for your good. And
Yeah.
so that is the best decision you can make. And I encourage
Mhm.
everyone to choose Jesus and watch what he does with your life.
I love that. I love the fact that you are so focused on putting Christ first and letting him do the work through you. It's really powerful. And I know so many women will be watching this that it will be hard, but I think you will give them that hope that they need to take that next step and hopefully find somebody like you to walk alongside of them. But for sure, they need it, and you're providing that hope. And I thank you for pointing them to Christ. And so grateful for you being here today, Priscilla. Thank you for sharing your story, for being willing to be vulnerable, because it's always hard. It doesn't matter how many times you share your story,
Yeah.
but this will definitely be impactful and an encouragement for so many people out there. And that's my hope and prayer. So I look forward to maybe having another conversation, and maybe because Michigan's not that far, we can go shopping and have a
Yes,
coffee.
let's do it and get coffee. Yes.
I'd love
Yes.
to,
My
because I
parents
know that's
said,
one of
like,
your
I mean,
loves.
honestly, all you gotta tell me is coffee, counseling, and like honestly, and Christ. Like those are
Perfect.
my favorite
I love it.
C's. Yeah.
Well, you're
So
not far. You're just across the border, and you're welcome here
yeah.
anytime too.
I've never
So,
been to Canada, so like I would have loved to
well,
come with you.
you know who to call.
Yes.
Love to see
Okay.
you
Well,
around.
I'm so thankful to have been here. And honestly, there is no story without Jesus. So, like, my life is where it's at because of him. And so I'm super
I
thankful
agree.
for the opportunity to continue to share his goodness and what he continues to do, not just in me, but what he can
Right.
do in others as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being a faithful servant and for being so willing to come alongside of people that need a voice and need a trustworthy friend. And thank you for committing your life to these women and to the men and to, first of all, to the Lord. So thank you. I look forward to
Thank
another
you.
conversation another time.
Thank you, Sandy. We'll talk soon.
Sounds wonderful.
Bye.